Pocket 3, Luna, Pocket 3, no, Luna, Pocket 3, Luna, Pocket 3, Pocket, oh. Today's video is all about shooting photos, and shooting photos with the Insta360 Luna Ultra. I shot a lot of photos over the last few days, and I'm shooting a mixture of JPEG and RAW because I want that great latitude, you know, pull it this way, pull it that way, of your RAW photos. So you've got that extra latitude to bring out the highlights and push down bring up the darks and so on. So how did the camera do the Insta360 Luna with the RAW files? Well, I'll tell you, it is just, wow. It is just that, wow, bad. It's really bad. What are they doing to these RAW files? They're destroying the RAW files. It's the worst RAW files I've ever seen in my life. And I'm going to show you this. Not only are they destroying them, you can see the settings. They're actually putting negative exposure settings to the RAW files, which are completely different than the JPEG files shot at the same time. But first, let me show you my settings I'm using. Okay, to show you my settings, I've got the little mini screen taken off the camera, and I've got it right here so we can see it. Right now you can see this is set to video mode. So I have this second button right here programmed so I can press it once and then press it a second time, and it switches me over to photo mode. So now I'm in photo mode, and I'm in, let's see, the ultra photo mode. So when you're in ultra photo, I have this button set to go to the different zoom ranges. So I do that, and now we're at 3x. Now let's zoom into 6x. Oh, wait a minute. It went back to 1x. Why did it go back to 1x? Let me try that again. 3x. Oh, that's right. You should probably know that when you're using the ultra photo setting, you can't go past 3x. You only have two settings. Two settings in the high megapixel, like 33 megapixel thing. So you can either shoot in 20 millimeter or go to 3x. Where is it? And shoot in 60 millimeter. Also, when you take a photo, let's take a photo. Let me see here. There, I took a photo. Let's take another one real quick. Okay, let's go to 1x. Oh wait, you can't take another photo until it has completed. Oh, okay, well, let's go to 1x again. There we go. Let's try to take two photos. 1, 2, we're gonna zoom. Why can't we zoom? Oh wait, it can't take any more photos because it's still writing to the card. Huh. So in other words, when you're in ultra photo, not only are you limited to 20 millimeter and 60 millimeter, you're also limited on how much you can do. Once you start taking a few photos, this message is going to pop up all the time, and you're going to have to wait 5, 6, 7 seconds before you can take the next photo. But if you go into, change this over to standard mode, now you have 1x, 2x, 3x, 6x, and even 12x, that multi-zoom, digital zoom. So that's wonderful. You can still shoot in JPEG and RAW, but you're now only in 8 megapixel. So it's not quite as good, but you can shoot a lot faster. Well, not real fast. And then I have this button over here set. Let me see, let's go that back, bring this back to 2x. If I double click, I bring up an exposure, and I can change my exposure, plus exposure, or on this side, minus exposure. You can see it getting darker and darker. Let's put it back to 0. You just wait a second and that goes away. So that's how I can run and control the camera. So once again, press over here, bring that up, press a second time. I could switch back to video. I'm on 4K 30. Press it once again. I'm in photo mode. So now let's get into the problems with photo mode. So a lot of times when we would go traveling, we would be in a restaurant and I would shoot pictures of the menu, things like this, pictures inside the restaurant, and this is all with the Pocket 3. It took very good pictures because it's a 1-inch sensor chip. So now with the Insta360 Luna Ultra, I was really hoping to be able to even up this a little bit more to get even a little bit better picture quality in lower light restaurants like this. This is where you'd be posting pictures to social media, sending pictures to friends, maybe, oh boy, this wine here, this was really good. These were pictures from when we were in Portugal. I loved this wine. You know, you post these pictures on Facebook, you could send them to people right away. Anyways, this is what I want to be able to do with the Insta360. Now let's take a look at some of the photos that I shot as an example. So I'm going to show you some of the DNG RAW files, some of the JPEGs, some of the edited versions of JPEGs, some of the edited versions of RAW files. And some of the RAW files I'm going to show you, it's just mind-blowing how bad they are. And I'm going to show you the settings. You'll be able to see the settings up there in the top right corner, and we could discuss that, and you'll see how the settings are different from the JPEGs from the RAW files, which makes no sense whatsoever. Now this first image right here, I'm going to have to look over here to this side to see the settings a lot. This is right out of the camera. This is a DNG file. And the first thing that you can see is there's massive vignetting going on. But then if I take the JPEG file, now I did edit this and I cropped in a little bit. Look at the difference. This is a f2 at 3,571. Okay, that's this file here. Actually, this is the raw file edited, sorry. Cropped in and edited. This is actually very good. The detail's fantastic with this 1-inch sensor. Another DNG file, and here's the edited version. See what's going on? I'm cropping in, getting ready the bad vignetting, boosting the color, and that looks really good. I'd be really happy with that. Another DNG file, raw file, and then here's the edited version. Now here's where the problem starts. Look at this DNG file, the raw file. When you have a subject that is backlit, where the brightness is behind them, it is doing some crazy, nutty things here. It's giving it a whacked out exposure. And look at that. This is the JPEG file. This is two different files. There's the RAW file. There's the JPEG file. They're both different settings, but this is the same file. So the JPEG is getting it. The RAW, you can't even recover that. Let's go to another one. Here's the RAW file. Here's the JPEG file. The RAW file is unrecoverable. It's made the blacks so black, there's nothing left in it. Here's another one. Look at the exposure compensation set to this. -3 exposure compensation at 5,357 shutter speed, ISO 280 f2. Why? This is unrecoverable. And there's the JPEG version of it. Zero exposure compensation and only 654 shutter speed. Completely different setting. This is the same image. I cropped in a little bit during editing on this. That's why it looks a little bit cropped different. But they were both shot identically at the same exact time. The RAW photos are coming in with a completely different setting. Now this one was pretty good. This RAW image didn't look bad because doesn't have anything that's backlit. The colors look good. And then here's the JPEG. RAW, JPEG, but look at the different settings. This RAW photo, once again, has an exposure compensation of -3. When do you ever use -3 exposure compensation? Maybe on the brightest day on Earth when you're staring into the sun? Not on an image like this. I use exposure compensation literally every day on our natural light shooting. I'm generally at, a couple clicks of plus exposure compensation to make the image brighter. This is destroying the image. And then here's the JPEG. So basically what you're getting to see is shoot JPEG, because the RAWs, they kind of suck. But the other thing is the RAW files are actually better. So here's a RAW file, and here's the JPEG. This RAW file, look, -2 exposure compensation, where the JPEG has 0 compensation, like it should, like a normal file. But sometimes you'll see later, as we're looking at the RAW files that do not come out too bad, you can edit them and they look better than the JPEGs by far, because there's more detail and latitude in them. Okay, here's another RAW file. Isn't that wonderful? Man, that is an awesome, awesome picture. Look at that, just black and black and black. It's like it's perfectly exposed for that sky back there. I wonder what's going on the band here. Well, maybe if we look at the JPEG, oh, the whole band is standing there playing. But this is the way the RAW file shoots it. It decides to shoot it at -3 exposure compensation with a shutter speed of 4,762. That's nuts. But the RAW image decided to shoot it with 0 compensation, only at 575 shutter speed. What a huge difference. Why didn't the RAW image use these same settings? And then we'd have a RAW image that's actually usable instead of something like that. Let's keep going. Here's the RAW photo. Man, great. It's like a silhouette. I say, I want a silhouette photo of the band from the back. I have the perfect camera. The Insta360 Luna is my perfect silhouette camera when I shoot RAW, because when I shoot in JPEG, I get a normal picture, a picture that you would actually like. Silhouette versus normal, RAW versus JPEG. Same camera, same exact shot, but it's giving you 2 different exposures. Look at this. This is the RAW image. -3 exposure compensation. Look at that on the right. At 561 shutter speed, ISO 100. And then here is the same exact shot. 0 exposure compensation, shutter speed of 100. This is 1.8. And this is what's weird. This is supposed to be a 1.8 lens, but this goes down to 1.7999999999952 is what it says there. Some weird voodoo magic is going on here. This is like the ultimate silhouette camera. But if you want good images, you need to shoot RAW anytime anything has any backlighting like that. Here's the DNG RAW photo. Here is the JPEG edited photo. And here is the RAW edited photo. So from this to this from a RAW file. Another one, there's the RAW photo, edited JPEG, edited RAW version. Now this one's one that's once again a big mess. Here's your RAW photo. It turned everything black and it overexposed the flower. Here's the JPEG version. It didn't really do that much better on this. And here's another one. The blacks in the background are just being crushed to death. Not the best exposure. And here's a JPEG version of that. Now this one here, for some reason, here's the RAW first. This isn't too bad. Now here's the JPEG, but here's where the RAW edit, I think, came out so much better. That's editing the RAW photo from that to that. versus that was the JPEG. The JPEG colors, a lot of times the JPEG colors are definitely not as deep and good as the RAW photos. Of course, it's not a RAW photo. And here the RAW is once again crushing all the blacks, but the JPEG was nice and bright. And if you look at this exposure on this, the exposure compensation is -2 on this. It's why? Makes no sense whatsoever. Why are both of these images that are shot exactly at the same time on the same camera having two different exposures? Okay, here's your RAW photo that has no detail left to recover, and here's your JPEG. Look at the RAW photo, it's -3 exposure compensation versus no exposure compensation on the JPEG image. So sometimes, once again, you can see with that sky, the bright sky, the camera's freaking out and makes everything dark. And here it is again. This would have been such a great shot. Luckily, I have shot it in JPEG too, because here's what the JPEG did. The JPEG does a great job, but the fact is the RAW images have so much more extra little detail and stuff if it was working correctly. This is not working correctly. Look at the exposure. It's -3 exposure compensation. I'm not adding that. The camera is doing this itself. It's nuts. It's insane. These are the same pictures shot at the same exact time on the same camera. One's JPEG, this, and one's RAW. The RAW is unrecoverable. All the blacks are so crushed and destroyed the way it shot this that you can't recover it. But the JPEG is just fine. Here's another one. Here's your RAW file right out of the camera. That's why I'm using this program, because you're looking at the real raw unedited file. That's how they're coming out of the camera. And here's the JPEG, which I edited this a little bit because I can. When I try to bring up all these blacks, I can bring the black point down to 0, bring the exposure up, bring the brightness of the shadows up. You cannot fix this. It's destroyed. It's useless. So there you got your JPEG. Now this is a 33 megapixel image we're still in. Here's your RAW. It's crushing the blacks. Now I got different images. Here's the JPEG version. And here I did edit the RAW, and I was able to recover a lot of this because from this RAW, it's not super killed. But it's still, even from my RAW image, it's getting very dark in those areas in the back and in the bushes, where if you look at the JPEG, it's much more brighter and opened up, like it should be. Okay, here's my dog. This is RAW, right out of the camera. And this one's not too bad. Now, here is what the JPEG looks like right out of the camera. So here, now I'm going to add some extra pictures in here. So RAW right out of the camera, JPEG right out of the camera. This is the RAW edit, and here's the JPEG edit. So that's what we're going to do through a couple. So RAW, now this is pretty decent, but it's still too dark. It should be brighter than this for a RAW image if it's exposing properly. So RAW, JPEG, you can see right away when you go to JPEG, it's cleaning up all the bad vignetting going on. And then the edit, RAW edit, it's not bad. JPEG edit. Actually, here's where you can see, I think the RAW edit looks better. There's a little bit more detail there, and when you get to the JPEG, it gets a little bit more mushy looking. Here's the RAW file. Once again, there's no bright background, so you don't have a big problem here, but it's still darker than it should be. Here's the JPEG. So JPEG, once again, is right away is brighter. Here's the RAW edit. I brightened it up. Here's the JPEG edit. Here's the RAW image. Here's the JPEG image. Here's the RAW image edited, and here's the JPEG image edited. Once again, I think the RAW edit looks better than the JPEG edit. Now, here once again, look, we have a sky back there. So what happens when we have a sky? Anything bright behind the image in the front? It goes to hell. It turns everything black and mushy. Look at that. There's your RAW image, and there's your JPEG image. Look at the difference. Let me see. We're at -3 exposure compensation again. God knows why, when here we have 0 exposure compensation, and here we're at 3,175 shutter speed, plus that -3 exposure compensation, and here we're only at 393 shutter speed with no exposure compensation. And here I tried to raw edit it. That's the best I could do, pulling the blacks down to 0 and bringing up shadow recovery and everything. But from the JPEG image, then I still have an image. So if you're going to shoot RAW, make sure you're definitely, well, you have to shoot JPEG and RAW. It doesn't have a setting just for RAW, which is probably a good thing because you wouldn't have any images half the time. Okay, here's the RAW image, and here's the JPEG. And once again, I think the RAW edit here looks really good. And when you go to the JPEG edit, you can see the quality just drops. The RAW image has so much more detail and depth and everything to it. This is, once again, this is a 33 megapixel. There we go. Here's your RAW image. Here's your RAW image. Completely crushed. Once again, hey, there's the sky. Every time you see the sky, you're assured to know that your RAW images is going to come out terrible. And here's what the JPEG looks like. And here's the RAW edit. I couldn't save anything in it. And here's the JPEG edit. Here's another one. Here's the RAW file. I'm going to start going through them a little bit quicker. RAW file, completely, there's nothing there, nothing there. And here's the same exact shot, out of the same exact camera, shot at the same instant. I don't know how it's doing this. This one's -3 exposure compensation, 4,373 shutter speed, versus no exposure compensation and 540 shutter speed. Why is this happening? This is a security camera. That's the RAW footage, of course. You can see by the vignetting, and there's actually 0 detail whatsoever there. And there is the JPEG image. You still have detail, and I couldn't edit the RAW. That's the best I could do. But with the JPEG, I was able to brighten it up, and you could actually see detail in there. Here's my dog biting me, biting my shorts. Okay, here's the RAW image. There's a RAW edit, and there's the JPEG edit. See, once again, when you go to that JPEG, there's something weird happening in the grass. It just gets kind of gritty and grainy. The RAW edit looks much better. Here's the DNG. This is the RAW of this bush. This wasn't too bad because there wasn't much bright going on behind it, and it was really easy to get a very good edit from it. Here's the RAW file, and once again, this is -2 exposure compensation. Why? Why is anything minus anything of exposure compensation for pictures that are not in a super bright day like you're staring at the sun? And here is the JPEG. What a huge difference. I mean, look how bright that is. Now, the colors kind of suck on that JPEG. I think the RAW colors are much better. But then when I edited the RAW, I got some very good colors, and I was able to brighten it up, but I still have some really dark areas there that I couldn't bring out. But when you see the JPEG, I could bring out some more brightness, but the colors aren't as good. Really shows you where the RAW file has that extra color detail. This is a good one here. This is the RAW file, really dark, and what's it doing here? -2 exposure compensation, which is insane. Here's the JPEG. So we got -2 for the RAW, no exposure compensation for the JPEG, but here's the RAW edit. I was able to bring a lot of that back. It looks pretty decent. And there is the JPEG edit, which just looks, like I said, the colors on the JPEGs just aren't as good as the RAW file. Big, huge difference. RAW, JPEG, RAW, JPEG. We could write a song, RAW and a JPEG, and then a RAW file. Now here there's nothing bright behind this image, so this RAW file is not bad. So that's a RAW file, and there's the JPEG, and there's the edit from the RAW file, which I think came out pretty decent. So in certain situations, you could use these RAW files and they come out great. RAW file, JPEG. RAW file, JPEG. Here's the RAW file edit. I was able to brighten that up. Okay, it should be brighter. The darks shouldn't be that dark. And here's a RAW file. And here's the JPEG. Look how much more bright the background is. RAW file that's crushing the blacks like it always does. And here's the JPEG. The RAW file should start like this. And then here's the RAW file edit, where I was able to bring back some of that brightness, but still not as much as this JPEG. But you do get that really good. There's the JPEG color. Here's the RAW color. The RAW color just pops a little bit more. Okay, here we have, this is a RAW edit. This is a JPEG edit. There's a RAW edit, JPEG edit. I'm going to go through some things real quick here. Now, right here, I'm shooting in the 8 megapixel smaller file size, the standard size, so we can do some more zoom ranges. This is the RAW file, and here's the JPEG. And here's a JPEG. We're going in. So what we're doing is we're going from 40 millimeter, 60 millimeter, 120 millimeter, and this is the 240 millimeter zooms. Let's do that again. Well, start with, there's your RAW. Of course, it's crushing all the blacks. Looks like crap. So here's your JPEG, 40, 60, 120, 220. And here's a wonderful photo if you really like silhouettes of a tree that don't have any detail. So this is your RAW photo, of course it is, because you can see the sky. It has a bright sky behind it. Well, not a bright sky. This is not even a bright day out. This is a crappy, stormy day. We've been having rain and storms and thunderstorms for the past few days. I've barely been able to get out and even shoot anything. But now let's look at the JPEG. Now, look at this. -3 exposure compensation with a shutter speed of 3,429. Wow. Wow. Now let's see. What did the JPEG shoot it as? No exposure compensation at 429 shutter speed. So, RAW, JPEG. RAW, JPEG. Now here's my JPEG edit. I just boosted the colors a little bit. And we're almost done here. Here's, once again, last bunch of images. Of course, this is the RAW photo because the trees have absolutely no detail in them. And here is the JPEG. It brings all the detail back. And here's my JPEG edit. So anyways, that's my sample images for showing all this. Now I wanted to show you one more thing. When you're previewing your images, your photos, it does not show you any of the RAW photos. As you're scrolling through here, it only will show you your JPEG files. And if you click, there's a little thing here, you can click on that, and it will show you information. See, I don't know if you can see that. JPEG, RAW, shows information, color settings, and so on. Close that down. And you can scroll through more pictures, but you can't see the RAW files in the playback. That's why when you're shooting, you don't even know your RAW files are being destroyed, obsessed by the dark force or something like that going on. So anyways, that's today's videos on shooting photography with the Insta360 Luna Ultra. I really hope they fix this because I would really like to be able to shoot with those RAW files and edit the RAW files. I would do that all the time. Obviously, the RAW files have more detail in them when they're exposed correctly, but as you can see, they're almost never exposed correctly. The fact that you get two different exposures between the RAW file and the JPEG file means something is seriously wrong. And when you're shooting in just the ultra photo mode and you only can shoot between the 20 millimeter and the 40 mil or the 60 millimeter, it makes me wonder, is there a reason why? Because this is not really optical going from 20 to 40, so it has to go from 20 to that optical wide ends to the 3x 60 where it switches to the other camera to be able to be optical? I don't know. But anyways, I hope they fix this, because this is something that I planned on using all the time for photos, because the photo quality should be much better than my cell phone. So anyways, that's today's video. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you later.